Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. CCPA, Building a System, Whether to Build or Buy. This is Justin Antoni Pillay from Wirewheel, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Bill Schauman from ACA Oponics, one of their lead directors in the data privacy practice. Bill, welcome to the webinar today.
Hello, Justin. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Glad to be here on a cold winter day.
That's great. And do you mind giving our viewers today a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I've been doing privacy for about 25 years now. I come from the technology side, where I was a technologist long before I got into security and privacy. Worked with Big Four Consulting for almost 20 years, and now I'm kind of stepping back a little bit and working with a smaller team at Oponics, and we do privacy and security, focusing on financial service industry, and we do a lot of implementation work and testing and assessment. So great to be here and talk about this interesting topic.
Bill, well, thanks so much. And you know, part of the thing that I think for folks joining today is that you have a lot of on-the-ground experience with folks who are really trying to tackle CCPA in the month, 2 months since it went into effect. And we're focusing today on a really important topic, which is when you're actually tackling these requirements of the new California law. And of course, I think everybody who is tackling these things these days is thinking not only about CCPA, but the other laws that may be coming on board during the next year to 2 years. And there are somewhere between, as we're going to talk about, to 10 or 15 states considering those. There's a critical decision that a lot of companies are trying to make, which is you need some systems in place around your privacy compliance. And of course, you need people to help tackle these privacy challenges. And when it comes to those systems, does it make sense to build them yourself? Or should you buy something off the shelf, or something in between? And this is an important topic for a lot of companies, because in the months leading up to CCPA, so many companies tried to tackle, the initial requirements with something they stood up, their own web form or some basic materials. Even now, until the Attorney General finalizes their regulations here in the next few weeks, there are a lot of companies struggling with how do I get ready? And we may need to get ready very quickly. So we're going to talk about, I think, you and I, what we've been seeing in the last 2 months since CCPA went into effect, and try to put some things on our on companies' tables in terms of the things you should think about to build a program and a system that can grow with CCPA and other laws. I assume you're seeing the same thing, Bill?
Yeah, absolutely, Justin. I really think, over the last, I'd say 5 years, we're at a tipping point now. We're at a tipping point where the rest of the world has looked at this, and now it's really our turn. And combined with the types of data that we have that drive our businesses now, the risk is completely changed from what it was. And either you build or buy, the important thing is you need a system. You need something that you're going to manage this going forward, because there's only going to be more variables in the types of data that we have and the types of rules that control those. So having a system that can handle that at a program level is much less disruptive to the organization, and putting that in place. So I think there's a lot of good choices on the systems that are out there today that were developed specifically in the privacy age. But I also understand that some organizations build their own stuff. So it's a great topic, and let's get started.
That sounds great. And, obviously Wirewheel has a view on this, right? We do have a software platform built for the different kinds of privacy needs we're seeing from companies. One side of that is you have so many companies that need to manage their customers' privacy needs. That might be privacy notice, trust centers, the actual management of access, deletion, opt-out requests, and of course, consent and preference management. And we then often break it down into the company's privacy compliance needs. that might be creating the critical privacy documentation like privacy assessments, data protection impact assessments, your vendor management records, all of those things, which often depend on doing some data discovery, some classification and inventory and mapping. And while we do really believe that, there is a whole set of solutions you need on the technology front, our fundamental view is that really people are driving this sea change on privacy, that it's the privacy professionals, the human beings that are actually running the privacy programs. They're critical right now. There are too many judgments to be made. There are too many laws that are coming online. So when we see something that says, okay, you're going to be able to plug in artificial intelligence and all of your privacy needs are solved, that's a thing that we really don't believe in, even though we're a software platform. And when we're really looking at this, and I'll come back and come over to here, Bill. We focused on some key areas, but I assume you obviously, helping companies implement are probably seeing the same thing.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And when you talk about the different privacy areas, the resourcing is really amplified because we know that it takes people from the business, from IT to run the systems, and from the business to understand the business processes that involve PII. But the challenge is traditionally privacy organizations themselves are very small. There's 1 or 2 people in small privacy offices. So, resources are really stretched thin. And so, having a platform that can help you with the workload and it is really something that can accelerate it. And that's what we do at ACA. We do a lot of the implementation work, understanding the processes behind it. What do you take to configure the tool correctly to make the IT and the business all be speaking from the same page? So.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. So when we're coming down to the build versus buy versus some mix of the two, and really there are 3 choices, right? It's not just build it all, buy it all. It's often a kind of mix. We really focus on 3 critical kinds of questions. The first are, what are your goals? There is a maturity curve on these privacy programs. A lot of companies right now, while they want to get to the point of thinking about privacy as a big strategic issue, we like to be realistic about it. And a lot of companies right now just need to get to a minimal compliance state. And so aligning your choices on build versus buy versus hybrid to what your current goals are is critical in our view. The second key set of questions to really ask yourself when you're looking at the choices is look at all of the costs of your choices, and often it's much more than just the sticker price. So if you're looking at point solutions, look at the licensing models, but then also the cost of implementation. We've seen a lot of companies that when they were looking at solutions, decided to build, and build the whole thing themselves. And there is an opportunity cost issue to put on the table with your entire team. Because if your day-to-day business is not in the compliance or privacy world, then you're taking resources that might be to build your application or your systems, and they have to actually maintain their own homegrown privacy solution. And we'll talk about what we've seen that means. The biggest thing we've seen is if you've started integrating with your own systems to automate some of these privacy challenges, things like your back-end data stores, you're going to have a persistent set of challenges around taking systems off your privacy compliance tool and putting it on, and that can be very expensive. And then the third, Bill, I'll turn over to you, but there is a critical series of questions you have to ask when you're thinking build versus buy versus hybrid. What are the real risks to your business? And I assume you have to ask that all the time.
Yeah, I mean, risk can be looked at in so many ways, and I really love the point of this regarding the resources that you're misdirecting people to consider how do we build a new tool kind of out of the blue with these new requirements that we're trying to figure it out and build it at the same time. And the reason I kind of almost like the MVP approach is that it gives those resources more time to kind of work out the process and put up something that, works right away, but it might be minimal. And then as you kind of more plan a full rollout, it allows you to kind of use those resources better. So definitely, people can't be doing multiple things and sustain very long. Hello? Did we lose everybody?
Yep. Oh, I'm sorry about that, Bill. What I was saying is, this is, mapping to exactly what you were saying. Looking at your goals and then mapping your build versus buy versus hybrid to your goals is critical. We haven't seen any companies that don't want to get minimally compliant. Everybody needs to get minimally compliant. That means you need to think about how, for your own system, you're going to get people to use it. You have to think about the templates you're going to be able to get out there that map not only to the new California law, but the second version of California and all of the other templates you're going to need in the future. And you have to figure out ease of use. And this can be a very tough challenge in the privacy technology space. Like, can your team actually use it if you've built it yourself? And you want to look at the tools you're building under that model. But then we get to the scalability. Not every company needs full integrations with all of their systems. You have to look at the about the number of requests that you're going to get. What are those critical systems that you have to pull from every single time? Things like, every company that starts getting a lot of requests starts to look at their CRM, your Salesforce, for example. You almost always are going to need to look at your marketing platform, your Marketos, your Eloquas, and so forth. So scalability becomes the next major question. And then, of course, some companies really start to think about privacy as a strategic advantage. But that has to be a goal that you have a conversation around. Don't you think, Bill?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And because, as I said earlier, we are kind of at a tipping point. And I think almost everybody, all boards, should be looking at security and privacy as a strategy, or where does it fit in your corporate strategy? If you follow, the trades and LinkedIn, you'll see that, that is constantly a topic of the boardroom right now. So, if you start with this minimally compliant and start to think about your processes, think about your future business and how you move towards that strategy, I just think it's in the cards for everybody at this point.
No doubt about it. Well, so, I think just at least for a little bit before we get into the build versus buy, it's critical to talk about the lessons we've all learned from these first few months. And with that, maybe I'll turn it over to you, Bill, to talk a little bit about what you're seeing.
Great. Thanks, Justin. So, we all know, heard now for months about California, but just want to touch on some of the, the basics of what is different about it. We get a lot of comparisons at ACA to, hey, is this the same as GDPR? Is it different than GDPR? And, who must comply? And so, there are a lot of applications. Obviously, it's for California residents, and it's for, those consumers. And they have definitions now around personal information. Where is that? One of the things that California did is really broaden that definition of personal information to include stuff that we never really considered before. And I think sale of data is one of those key components to this. This is brand new. Nobody has ever had a regulation where we considered the sale of data because, like I said before, for the last couple of years, Internet of Things, new IoT data, new behavioral data, facial recognition, these are all things that are in our environment now that never were before. And so now we have to be able to configure and manage that data and say, this data is allowed to be sold. And we have data brokers, and we have companies that just buy and sell data. So we have to recognize that it's a new normal. And this is something that, I think is just, we have to be, it drives these other requirements around verification. The worst thing that we can do in one of these data subject rights requests is to give the wrong data to the wrong person. It still kind of tells, back to a pure privacy point of is being transparent, is telling people up front, yes, we buy, sell data, and we take the appropriate steps to manage it. But it's a new capability, and I think it's something that we really have to have systems and processes that are focused on.
There's no doubt about that. And I'll tell you, you covered the critical questions we see from almost every company when they're making these decisions around systems and build versus buy versus hybrid. And there's an enormous amount of focus right now on how do I operationalize something that actually gets you to be able to take an opt-out of the sale of data, exactly as you said, Bill. We hear a lot of questions when you're trying to make a build versus buy decision around verification and authentication. Because as a company, really understanding, I'm going to have to build a system if you've decided to build yourself. And you're going to be the one that now starts taking more information from consumers in order to verify who they are. This ends up being a bit of a challenge. And to say the least, right? If you start taking questions, if you start taking IDs, you now create another risk for yourself. And so that is a critical decision point we've seen when it really comes to verification and authentication and the systems you use. The third we've really seen is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just quickly, I agree completely. We get a lot of questions, and there's a lot of trepidation about that out there. People are saying, you mean I have to collect more data now to do this, to verify this process? And it's a place we've never been before. So it needs specialized skills. Yeah.
And exactly, and the upfront notices that you actually have to give under CCPA and others can be tough, And so with privacy teams small, having a system that you'll be able to maintain without going back to your web team can be difficult. One thing that we thought we'd do today is we get a lot of questions of just what does it mean to operationalize the do not sell requirement, and we thought we'd just show one example of exactly what that means. On your website, you're going to need a do not sell button that persists on every page. A consumer will need to be able to go there, and then you're going to have to decide whether when a do not sell request is created, whether you want to collect more information from that consumer, or if you just want to rely on whatever information you're observing about them. This is, again, a critical element of a build versus buy decision, is setting up the infrastructure to actually be able to take a do not sell request and adding metadata to it if you want to. Once it's submitted, you actually need to let the consumer know that a request has in fact been created. And then you want to be able to give some signal that the request was taken. From an admin perspective, you need to be able to record that do not sell request in a place that includes not only the data that was provided by the individual, and really importantly, for regulatory purposes, you need a suppression list. You need a place that automatically records every one of these requests together with the observed information and the information that was actually provided by the individual. These are the critical elements of a do not sell request that your solution, whether you build it or you buy it or you have some hybrid approach, that you need to bring to the table. And so as you're considering those things, make sure that you've taken them all into account. Now I'm going to pivot back to Bill again to talk through some of the questions that come up and what we've been seeing in the market in terms of the number of requests.
So I think the number of requests, people have been put this in place previously for GDPR and now for CCPA, and the requests are coming in. I don't have strict numbers on how many. I think a lot of it is very much dependent on the type of organization that is out there, the type of customer that they have. But the request to be able to authenticate and take a request is something that is very challenging, but it is going on. So I think if we want to talk on this slide really kind of about the types of requests that are out there, there are two types of access requests that can happen and delete requests. And the access requests are partial for just part of the information, the categories of information, which is more descriptive of what you have, and then there's specific data. And so being able to run that entire work stream front to back and consider the data in the back can be an expensive venture if it's not set up right, if you're reacting instead of plan for it. So along with the opt-out that Justin demonstrated, the other request types are, I think, one of the huge differences in this regulation versus anything we've ever seen before. The ability to find that data, take a request, track a request, and find the data and return it to the proper person really takes a lot of process, it takes a lot of resources, and it takes a lot of good system power, and obviously depending on the organization and the data structure type.
Yeah, Bill, I agree. And we have received one question, from folks, because on the last slide here, I'll come back. We talk about the average cost of fulfillment, and that is a really good question. Where does this number come from? Gartner just published a report, I think it was 2 days ago, that talks about the cost to enterprises when they're trying to fulfill a subject access request, a pure access request, in a manual way. So if you're having to email around the requests and collect them and you incorporate the time, those companies that are doing it all themselves are averaging about $1,400 per request, and it's usually taking weeks of time. Now, again, that may be okay if you're not getting a ton of them. And it may be okay if you've got something that you're making it through right now. We are seeing certain kinds of companies, for example, big consumer-facing enterprise companies that are part of the sort of telecom space, folks that are doing business with people using apps that track location, get a significant number of requests in the thousands, sometimes more than that. And when you start getting into those numbers, a purely manual approach using homegrown systems can sometimes get very, very expensive.
Yeah.
So with that, I think I move on to our next slide here, Bill, which is, it's really a moving target right now.
It is. But not to fail, I don't think people should stop because of that. It is a moving target, but as we kind of saw with those state regulations, I think it'll always be a moving target. We have just on Tuesday, I believe, was the last day of the most recent comment. So we don't have a final report. There's also not topics yet about originally if it was due on January 1st, enforcement wouldn't begin for 6 months. And we're assuming that, enforcement will continue to have a 6-month duration, but, that's not been stated either. So there is definitely a lot of uncertainty, which causes people to be concerned. But I think if you had, the type of where we talked about the strategy and had a program mind in place and kind of focus on developing up your privacy program along with the platform that you're going to run it with, the changes are become less hot for you because you'll be kind of more focused on actually getting something done. But it's definitely a moving target. And like I say, with the other state regulations, the speculation on federal is not even a topic worth considering, I think, at this point in time, with so many state regulations in play. So I think that's just something we have to put in our pants pocket and say, hey, we're moving on and we're gonna build a solution because we know we're gonna need most of this capability. The details of any remaining changes are probably gonna be minor.
Yeah, I agree, Bill. And the headline here is just, when you're making that build versus buy decision or trying to pull something together that's a mix, remember you're mapping not only to CCPA, you're mapping to the way the regs are being revised, and you're probably starting to map to the next version of CCPA, the CPREA, which is currently polling at 85 to 90% in California, and has a number of new requirements. And here, Bill, we've seen, and we just highlighted a few. There are probably, another 10 states considering them, including Virginia, when you're thinking about the requirements. So make sure that if you've decided to build, you have a way that you can leverage your system against multiple different regulations. That's what we do day to day, but it does become critical in that build versus buy decision, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. It is. You have to be able to make those adjustments. It is kind of a compliance convergence thing, though. You know, we see there'll be so many requirements, and you have to be able to handle them all across the board. Which kind of, again, I speak to, you know, the privacy program, looking at a framework and making sure you're developing all these components. But what's interesting about the state laws is, and we get a lot of questions of, you know, hey, first of all, the obvious question is CCPA just like GDPR? And then you start looking at the state laws, and they're not necessarily following either one completely. You know, some are kind of GDPR focused. Washington State, I believe, also has, you know, the assessment component in it. So they've kind of taken pieces and parts of all of them. And so having that flexibility in the build versus buy space is going to be critical to be able to make those adjustments. But having the program in place and having ways to make those adjustments is the first step to be able to react to them and quickly change.
Yeah, no doubt about it. We did receive another question, Bill, and folks were asking for a citation to the Gartner report. So it's called the Gartner Market Guide for Subject Rights Request Automation. It was published just a few days ago, and I'll try to find the date of it. And the sites or the specific data they gave was that organizations that have at least 100 employees, 50 million in revenue, so larger companies, were spending on average $1,406 per subject rights request and needed about 2 to 3 weeks to respond to that. So it was published on February 21st of this year. And I guess, you know, to go on to this next point, we're also seeing that, you know, the CCPA requirements, you know, whereas years ago, I think a lot of folks were building their systems purely for a compliance team. You really do have to think about whatever you build as being something that can support your marketing and data management teams. You know, I'll tell you, when companies first launch their first CCPA portal, they're almost always fine with something that's out of the box. But very quickly, with any company that cares about their brand, we're finding that the marketing team and the sales team wants to make that privacy portal really tell a story around privacy and trust. And so you need to make sure that if you're building it, that you build in the flexibility, that your marketing team can leverage it. We have, for example, been building trust centers on Wirewheel that tell a full story on privacy and trust. And so just put that on your radar, because a lot of the burden we're seeing around CCPA itself is not only on the team on the privacy and compliance side, but it's something that needs to be leveraged by your marketing and sales team.
I think this is so spot on, and it tracks just with my kind of theory about the last couple of years. It absolutely was a compliance check, and what is the minimum I have to do to meet that? ACA, along with Compliance Week magazine, just conducted a survey, and one of the findings out of the survey was, what's the number one reason why people are doing this? And number one still was compliance. But number two was customer relations and being able to interact with your customer in an appropriate manner to show the privacy posture that the organization is carrying. And in order to do that, the data management challenges have to come with it, because we need a better, more granular view of our data to be able to serve it to our customers the way it's being requested.
Totally agree with you. Okay, well, with that background, and Bill, we should just keep jumping back and forth, because I think it's a terrific discussion, and I'll keep jumping in where we see questions from our listeners today. But I thought we could have a little bit of a conversation on, do you build or buy? Or is there sort of a mix of the solutions that you can bring to bear depending on what your needs are? Because we're implementing with companies that have decided to buy the whole thing, and we are also doing it with companies that have built all or part of it, we have some really interesting set of sense of the market right now of some of the things that companies should consider. No matter whether you build, buy, or have a hybrid, you have a way that you can provide all of that critical consumer information to your customers. And that's going to be not only your privacy policy, you have to disclose very specific information about category information. You have to give do not sell type notices. And those do not sell notices, Bill and I have both been working on now for months, and they're complicated because often you're telling your customers, I don't sell my data as a technical matter, but it's broadly defined, and so here's what you should know. You definitely need something to be able to take and record that do not sell request and have a suppression list that you can show a regulator if you're asked about it. And then there are a lot of requirements around the ability to collect, validate, and authenticate, and of course, safely and securely fulfill the subject rights requests, so that if you're giving data back to a consumer, that you can actually handle them. And we've really seen, and if you look at the Gartner report as well around managing subject rights requests, they break the challenge into almost identically these categories: the ability to take a request for access or deletion, the ability to ticket and assign the requests, a safe way to review and manage the data as it's coming in an encrypted form, and then of course to review and deliver a report that's readable back to a consumer. And when you're considering your requirements and you're considering that build versus buy, make sure that each of these items are actually highlighted. So bringing together what Bill was talking about a few minutes ago, and then Bill, I'll turn it back to you here for a minute to get your take on this. Here are some things we've really learned around build versus buy and some of the challenges we've seen as a result. One of the main things that we've seen is minimal compliance is moving literally week to week. You know, we had a lot of companies build the first versions of their solution based on the draft regulations that came out before January 1st, and only to see very significant changes from the first draft of the regulations to the second draft of the regulations. And that caused a lot of tension internally at a company. So the reason I'm putting on the table something that I think a lot of our listeners might have seen, but if you went to your own IT team and you asked them to build it instead of buying something, and they committed a fair amount of resources to build it, and then it's pivoted twice in a matter of 3 months, that can often cause frustration just in the communications between the compliance team and the IT team. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the dynamic that you want on the table up front, because IT teams in many companies are just not built to pivot that quickly around a compliance solution day to day. I'm sorry, go ahead, Bill. Yep.
I agree with that, because I do think, you know, a lot of development teams, especially internal development teams that have built a lot of big systems within their own companies, they have their own process, and driving those requirements and developing the designs and all that takes a long time, in which time the privacy folks are kind of waiting. And so it's, you know, the minimal compliance build versus, buy a solution, you can kind of start working on the process right away, and you don't have this lag time for the build component, because we're almost out of time anyhow. So some capability is going to be needed, quickly as we put ourselves on, here today, February 27th.
Yep, totally agree. An area that we found that companies are sometimes willing to start with an out-of-the-box solution, but we found a lot of companies want to pivot away from that and start building them themselves, is on their actual front-end portal for their customers. If you can't brand it and make it look exactly like you want it to look, if you can't tell the story in a way that a marketing professional, feels comfortable, because trust and data is now so critical to selling your product, then a solution just will not work. So make sure that whether you build it or buy it, you're actually enabling your marketing team to tell the story they want to tell quickly. And we have focused a lot on that from our side, but we're seeing that with every company, when you give companies something that's launchable very quickly and doesn't have their branding on it, it becomes very frustrating.
Yeah, I think one of the drivers behind that, Justin, is that, you know, there's again this perception that I'm taking more information from my customers, and if I can brand it that it's my tool and I'm running it and I'm using it, then you're not handing it off to yet another third party to be able to process the request. Because I've absolutely heard that complaint as well. So that's a key component.
Could not agree more.
Brand it. Yeah.
Could not agree more. One other lesson we've really been seeing in the market around companies, even enormous ones, well-known companies that built their own systems themselves, is to consider the maintenance of your system, whether you build it or buy it or have something in between. And when I say maintain it, I'll give some specific examples. You know, if you start getting a lot of these requests, the companies that are building are often finding a way to have the data collected in an automated way from your data stores and some of your major platforms like Salesforce and Marketo. And when I say maintain, make sure you have considered a way that you can take systems on board when you need to, and that you have a way to take systems off when you no longer need them. That may seem obvious, and I think it's one of those things we all consider. But if you're building the system yourself and your own IT team is maintaining the whole thing, you're going to be going back to that team on a regular basis to have them help you take a system offline and offline. That's one example of a maintenance state that that you should consider as you're actually implementing. And the maintenance state we've seen with, you know, maintaining a wholly homegrown system, we have a lot of companies coming to us, not because it doesn't work, it works, but because it's costing, there's opportunity cost in there with their own teams having to do that so regularly. So we've often found that finding and having an honest conversation up front about what are your needs, how big is the system, and have you allocated some resources to maintain the system is really critical in that early stage. One thing that I will highlight too is we have a series of resources where we've identified, you know, a lot of the different specific questions you should consider when you're thinking about the build versus buy, and we've identified 150 questions. If you're interested in them, please go to the link at the top here, and you can download that guide as well. It has a lot more specific guidance that we can cover another time. Now, moving forward just a moment, this is a pretty good guide that, you know, to sort of highlight for Bill and I, to go through some of the pros and cons of the different approaches to managing the requirements under CCPA and a lot of the different laws. I can cover this very quickly, but I think a lot of the things, you know, Bill, if you have reactions to it, you can jump in at any time. First of all, there are companies that using a fully manual process for now is reasonable. You may get very few requests, or maybe you're not consumer facing. You want to make sure that you can tell the story and be compliant on the front end. There's definite benefits to that approach for certain kinds of companies. Obviously, a fully manual process has risks around, you know, human management. You often may have a tougher time tracking if you have to report things, but it is a process that certain companies should use based on their risks. You, of course, have a company that says, okay, we're going to build the whole thing ourselves, from the do not sell infrastructure to the access infrastructure. And that has the benefit, you can build it exactly the way you want, you have full control of it, and, you know, the licensing fees you may have on a solution can be committed to other things. We've seen risks there on the need for a pretty heavy investment up front from a team. You know, there's often not a focus, as I mentioned, on the opportunity costs and the maintenance of the system. And planning to make sure that you can pivot your own system to tackle not only CCPA, but 12 other laws, and making sure that you have a plan to onboard and offboard systems is critical, right? This is the kind of thing that when all you do is have a privacy platform like us, we've planned for those kinds of things, but it is a thing that we've seen hit a lot of companies directly. Bill, over to you.
Yeah, I think, I like this slide a lot because, these are, accurate, I think, from, the architecture and the process that's in place. But, the exercise really becomes, back to your first point, Justin, is what are the goals, and really matching your organization against what is the right solution. If you have very few clients and very few, requests coming in, then manual maybe does make sense for you. But if you're thinking more strategic for a long-term solution and thinking about privacy kind of as part of your core existence, then, kind of thinking through those and thinking through your business processes, you'll come up with where's the right way to go. I also, the privacy point solution ones are interesting too, because it seems like we're also approaching a world where some companies do one thing and they do it very well. And so there's a lot of, with API connected systems, there's a lot of, you can buy an expertise just for this. So you might already have some internal processes that are in your internal systems that you could leverage along with, if you buy like a platform, I'm just going to use this and use it for data subject rights requests. So I think really kind of the full gambit, as you said, is plausible. It's making that assessment against your own risk and your own business process and seeing which one fits for you. And those are questions that we try and help our clients with every day. So,
yeah, totally agree. Well, and that brings to there are obviously a lot of point solutions for specific problems. And so if what you're worried about is a specific thing, finding the module that hits that one requirement for implementing a specific privacy point solution is often the way to go. Again, that if you're worried at some point about scale, make sure you've asked that question. Does my point solution allow me to deal with the issue right now? And if something goes sideways, do I have a model where I can make it, really work? Is a critical question you should ask when you're doing that. And with companies who are worried about both sides of those things, I want a system that's going to work for minimal compliance, and I also want something that will scale. Asking those questions around scalability, is it really regulation agnostic? Are you going to be able to use what you're building or buying to map to all of those different regulations over the next year to 2 years? Very important question to ask. If you start getting into the point of, I'm going to want to start automating, you start seeing hundreds or thousands of different kinds of requests, make sure to ask the question of your team, have you a model to connect different kinds of systems? You want to be able to leverage things like a connector into your own data stores, a connector into some of the major platforms, and to be able to collect that information quickly. Now, building something that's a little bit more scalable and that might have a hybrid approach, it does require a higher effort up front. You can often do something, at least making sure that you've bought something that will map to the current and the future. It means that you have to look into it a little bit more. And we've really found that companies, when they're making that decision, especially in the build versus buy, you have to have some model that you're coordinating your decision across multiple parts of your company. What do I mean by that?
Yeah.
We've really seen that if you're buying a specific point solution for privacy and it's only trying to get something up quickly, you often can make that decision in your compliance team. But if you're buying something that you're going to want to leverage over the longer term or start to automate, it can be important to bring in your IT team and your security team to look at that as part of it so that you get buy-in on the use of that kind of system.
And as you described that, Justin, it's really, these concepts kind of flow together. The minimal viable compliance solution moving towards a strategic goal kind of can flow across this, this spectrum of hybrid and, bought software. So it's an interesting that, even you can start small with a single module, a single function, with the knowledge that, hey, I know I have a strategic goal and I'm going to throw policies in there next year, and I'm going to maybe start doing PIAs and, kind of build your program, but you can do it selectively across the board. So, I like how those two things work together.
Yeah, totally agree. So, we're going to go into a little bit more detail here in about a minute on, how we think about these as build versus buy versus hybrid. And we've tried to put on the table, Bill and I, some of the major things we're seeing in the market. But when you're doing it, here are the critical questions as takeaways. Look to meet your short-term goals. Make sure you can get to a minimally compliant state quickly. That your plan and your products have a way that you can both tell the story to your consumers and you can show something to your customers, and you have a way to actually document it for privacy purposes and privacy documentation and get it quickly. Make sure that we've seen a lot of benefits for at least having a conversation when you're thinking about a product, about whether your product will scale if it needs to. Will you be able to fully automate if you start getting more and more requests? Is it built in a way that will let you pivot from California to New York to Texas over the next couple of years? And then making sure that you have buy-in from the privacy team, the compliance team, that they have a sense that they can actually use your product is a really important conversation point when you're making your decision, because buying a solution that your team doesn't feel like they're going to use, or that you're not going to be enable them to use, can be something you're saddled with for a while after that.
Yeah, and that's that's a real thing. I've seen that. I've seen companies buy privacy solutions and even try and build them internally, but if they don't have that buy-in from the business and that they're going to use that, it becomes a waste. And that's where we kind of help with understanding what the process needs to be, who are the people that need to be part of it. We talked before about resources and shortage of resources. So you have to have a privacy community made up of your business and IT, and have those people kind of bought into this solution. And that way, you're going to get more out of it, because there'll be more people that are saying, hey, can you do this function and this function? And you're only going to add capabilities as you go. And I think, that kind of leans the scales a little bit, Justin, kind of away from an internal build, because you can't constantly be doing an internal build on, improvements all the time. At least what I've seen the way most organizations build stuff. So
I agree with you, Bill. We are getting additional questions coming in. So I'll talk about that, and then we're gonna, at the bottom of the webinar slides, we have a link, wirewheel.io/build-versus-buy-demo, where you can actually walk through a version of both a quick start program, in other words, something to get you up quickly with a fully branded trust center, everything you need to do to manage subject rights and the opt-outs, including a do not sell button. And we can walk you through how that could work in one model. And that same request, you can actually look at different ways for a much deeper orchestrated version of compliance, where you actually integrate with different systems and you start automating at scale. And that kind of an approach that we offer at Wirewheel gives you at least a model to look at more specifically as you're making that build or buy decision. And so we wanted to provide a way that you could see models for this specifically of what you need to do, and also provide you that resource of the 150 questions that you can put onto literally an RFI if you need to help your team make sure you're mapping against all of the requests we're seeing from a technical perspective. And when we're talking about these trust centers, we break it down in a way that can, this is an example of that with that critical do not sell button, where you're able to publish your privacy policy, something specific to California or New York or others, with templates behind it as a starting point for you to customize quickly. the ability to have a center that's focused on GDPR, that you can publish things in different languages if you're a larger company, and really to make sure that your privacy and compliance team can manage these. We see with a lot of companies that if they're publishing this information, the privacy team has to go to a web development team every single time they need to change a policy. And in the current regulatory environment, that can be kind of tough. So, having a trust center like we stand up with that critical do not sell request button is a really good way to start, and also provide you that way that you can brand it and add your own styles to it.
Yeah, what's nice about this? What's nice about this too is that the Trust Center really kind of fulfills one of the requirements, and it's actually kind of dates back to a core privacy requirement of just being transparent. Right here on one screen, you can show your organization's entire program. Here's the policies, here's the notice. You're being very transparent, easy to use, and I mean that's kind of what I always liked about this the front door part. That's driven by the privacy team.
Couldn't agree more. And by the way, another question we got, Bill, was how does an off-the-shelf provide process maps that manage business days as well as calendar days? So this is a really good question. Every company, when we've been actually getting them going for purposes of CCPA, will have this process mapping, like which systems do I need to hit? How many days will they need? We, for example, when you onboard with us, we have a 3-page outline of things you should consider to be ready to stand up your subject rights automation. And the question that our listener asked around this question asks precisely that answer so that it can be configured as an automated matter. So part of our configuration in our system allows you to map to these kinds of different deadlines for every part of the business process. And if you're deciding to build it yourself, make sure that your workflows give you a way as a privacy team that you can change those depending on what you actually see. I know this is a funny one, but you'll find that certain parts of your organization with certain folks that are committed will respond very quickly and others won't. And so you'll need a way that you can change those deadlines to map to the processes that actually happen in your company. And at Wirewheel, obviously, we're really focused on certain critical privacy program principles. We focus on doing the right thing with the data as a core principle here. But you can see a lot of the things that we've been mapping to are based on what we're seeing in the market, that you have to plan for a lot of unknowns right now. It is a very difficult thing at a large company to stand up and manage a privacy program. As a regular matter, we're really holding hands with our customers who are in the privacy space, because it's a tough challenge to get everybody's buy-in to really embrace this and then find out the regulations are changing this quickly. And putting that on the table and making sure your team understands that you're doing the best you can and that your marketing team may be hit with a lot of this burden is a really important communication point for our privacy customers. And we, of course, embrace change. The entire platform was built in a way that allows us to map to the requirements for California, rather than an idea of being able to give you a new template when New York and then your internal templates and your external templates when these new laws come out, so that you can get started very, very quickly. Bill, we have only a few more minutes here. Obviously, if there are folks on that have any other questions, just please put them into the Q&A portal, and Bill and I would be happy to jump on them right now. But Bill, do you have any other questions or points that you'd like to bring up before we?
No, I think I'd just like to, kind of reiterate that, there isn't a lot of uncertainty right now, but it's top of mind, I think, with everybody, and we're on top of a wave, and we're going to get there. There's a lot to be done in a lot of companies, and we're there to help, and just kind of, it's a good time to be in privacy. I mean, it's an interesting time that we have now with new types of data, new uses of data, and new requirements and new businesses. So, there's a lot to get done, and these are great tools to be able to have, make that happen. So,
well, Bill, I know we're
thanks for the invitation.
Time. Yeah, I've really enjoyed the conversation today. I hope this has been valuable to all the folks listening. If you'd like to see a specific walkthrough of what you should be building to, please go to wirewheel.io/build versus buy demo. You can see the link at the bottom of the page, or go to the link we've provided to actually give you those more specific requests for information or RFP type questions. And this is the first of a series. We'll have a weekly webinar now for the next few months, mapping to every one of the requests that are coming, and a lot of the regulatory changes over the next few months. Please subscribe to our webinar series if you'd like to be notified of the next in the series. And Bill, really phenomenal set of points from your side. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invitation. And if anybody needs assistance on the program side, I am Bill Shaman at acacompliance.com, and reach out and we can have a conversation.
Yeah, Bill's been implementing for years and really knows how to do it. So I do appreciate it, Bill. Thanks so much for joining today, and everybody else, thanks very much.
You're welcome. Everybody have a great day.
Have a great day.